My name is Tom Ronner. I am 78, and my birthday is February 17th, 1938. I was about 4 years old when Pearl Harbor was bombed. That was in December of 1941. Well, I lived with my parents and my brother Jim in San Diego all those years.
Okay, and did you have any friends or family or people that you know in the service or doing war-related work?
Well, you know, I did not know anyone at the time. My grandfather had retired from the Army in 1925, and I did not have any other relatives in the war at that time, although later in life, when I married, my wife's great uncle fought in the Battle of Midway, but not my direct family.
And like no one that you knew kind of in the neighborhood or your friends' parents who were doing work like that?
Actually, one of my very good friends across the street, Bob Sonnenberg, his father was in the Navy, and he died during the war. That was the only real personal relationship that I had that someone died during the wartime.
So, in what ways did the war change your daily life or activities or habits?
Well, you know, there were quite a few changes. It was brought to my attention that my father bought a new car in 1941, right after Pearl Harbor was bombed, because he was wise enough to realize that shortly thereafter, nobody could purchase a car or rubber tires. And in the middle of the war, no new cars were made because all the manufacturing went to tanks and airplanes. It affected it in other ways too. My mother, who had to do the shopping very carefully because we received rationing stamps, so everyone had equal access to scarce items, such as coffee, meat, cheese, butter, sugar, and gas was also rationed. Each person was allowed so much meat and a few ounces of cheese every week. And you had to shop very carefully, and most of the time, butter wasn't available. I remember when I was young, one of my jobs was to color the margarine, which was a butter substitute. It had a yellow dye in the package, so you could mix it all up and make it look like butter, but you had to put it into a mold to make cubes out of it and pretend it was butter. You know, there's a lot of other things happen. We had a pretty good-sized yard. My father built chicken coops, and we raised chickens for eggs and chicken. And we also had a victory garden. That was what they called it during the war, because we could raise corn and tomatoes and lettuce, because, you know, your food stamps only went so far. But one thing that stuck in my mind when I was a kid, you couldn't get any bubble gum. And, you know, I don't know if anybody today chews bubble gum, but everyone used to like to chew bubble gum. There must have been something in it like rubber or something, but until after the war, you could never get bubble gum.
How did living in San Diego during the war kind of differ from living somewhere else in the United States, like specifically with the naval base located there? How was the wartime more intense there?
A big target. Apparently there were some Japanese submarines that attacked either boats off the shore of California, but since it was a Navy base, and also a big manufacturing base for B-24 bombers, there was camouflage. And over one of the factories where they made bombers, way up high, there was camouflage, and on top of the camouflage, there were trees and houses, so from the air, you couldn't detect that it was a factory. It looked like just trees and houses. And I remember driving under it and looking up at the trees, and it was really cool. Balboa Park was taken over by the Navy during the war, so we couldn't go to any museums or picnic in the park. It was closed to the public. They used all the museum buildings for caring for the wounded, and they used the Lily Pond for teaching the naval recruits how to swim, and they took over the whole park. After that war, we could go back to Balboa Park and enjoy it. The other thing is that there were blackouts in San Diego because it was the closest shore to Japan and Hawaii. And there was concern that Japanese bombers might fly over, so we had lights out every night. My father had a wonderful workshop, and he made blackout window screens for my bedroom so we could read at night. In his workshop, he made wooden frames and covered them with tar paper. And we would put them on at the end of the day so we could have light in our bedroom and our other rooms of the house. I remember during the war, all the downtown was filled with sailors coming off their ships and going back to their ships. But I wasn't aware of much else. The other thing that struck me is that there was no metal used for things like toys or wagons or bicycles during the war. And my father made us wooden toys, boats and cars and trucks to play with, because you couldn't buy metal toys. Is that, there were gas rations, and you could only get so much gas each week. And that was only for essential driving, so no one could take trips or vacations till after the war. And you only got so many gallons of gas every week, just to go to the doctor, or go to school, or go shopping with.
And how did you and your family or the community cope with rations, or did you find any ways to get around them or make life easier?
Well, I think, sometimes people traded stamps. If you didn't use one stamp, you could borrow somebody else's, or if you needed more. But everyone just took it in stride. Plus, we raised vegetables, we raised chickens, and we had eggs, and everybody got by with a little bit less.
I don't know if you remember anything specific, but if you remember, what do you remember hearing about the war from radios and newspapers or rumors that were spread around during that time about what was happening?
There was no television. There was no email. This was a radio, and everybody listened to the radio all the time. And that's all we had. But you heard it on the radio. I didn't touch bases so often with what was going on time to time. I really didn't listen to the radio that much for news when I was that young.
What did you or your family and the community do when the war ended?
Well, I think there was a lot of celebration. I did remember very much the end of the war, and when we all heard about it on the radio, in my neighborhood, we were all young, but we had a parade in our neighborhood, and everyone had their bicycles and their wagons, and we had a big parade celebrating the end of the war.
So, relating to that, how did your life change when the war ended? What happened to the rations and people's jobs, wartime jobs?
Well, the rations went away, and I remember for the very first time, my father got a new car just a few years after the war, and we took our first family trip in the car. And we were able to travel, able to get gas, and then we had no more rations, and you could buy whatever food you'd like.
Yeah, so for the first time in your life, you were kind of having a more normal childhood, and
right.
And the rations went away for your toys and everything like that.
The times were still a little bit tough for a while, but still, it was much better because there was a long period of time from 1929 to the mid-40s or the late 40s, 48. There was very little building of homes. There was very little construction. Things were rationed. And after that, everything picked up.
So that's an interesting time to start your life.
Well, it was. And then after that, things were really, really good during the late 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s. And there weren't too many ups and downs in those years.